I want to just, before I turn it over to our guests, I want to make sure you understand the relevancy of a group like ours and the programs that our guests represent. I know for as long as I can think, I've always been interested in rights and freedom. And the interesting thing is, the first time I ever asserted myself was when I told my parents when I was about 12 years old that I wanted no part of religion. I thought it was bunk. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And for the next several Sundays, I'd have to spend my time in my room becoming probably the youngest free thinker, at least in the Chicago area. But that interest on my part in my right to express my opinions about religion in my way carried on with me throughout my life. I mean, I was involved with civil rights activities. When I was in school, I got fired, almost fired from my first job because I refused to comply with my employer's request to discriminate against blacks and women. And it went on. Since moving to Utah, I got involved in the demonstrations against Proposition 8 in California. I couldn't understand how a church would get so worked up over two people wanting to get married. So I got involved in that one. I invited Annabel Sheinberg here 2 years ago because I didn't like the way Planned Parenthood was being attacked. And so on. I worked for the Death with Dignity law in this state with Rebecca Houck. Vicki Samuelson back there remembers when we had a meeting here that she and Rebecca were featured. So this whole idea of rights and freedom have always been important to me. I reached out to our two guests during the summer, and what pushed me over the brink were two items. One was the growing impact of Catholic hospitals in this country. I've worked in a lot of Catholic hospitals as a consultant, but they are growing in number and a lot of them are in rural areas, and they are the only hospital. And I read about a particular instance involving a case that involved the ACLU of a young woman in Michigan who desperately needed to have her pregnancy terminated for her own well-being and her life. And she was turned away 3 times by the only hospital that was close to her, and that was a Catholic hospital. And I think that's despicable. And then I began looking at what the administration was doing under the guise of religion and freedom, and how all of a sudden the rights of people to discriminate against people of the wrong religion they're broadening it. I didn't like that. So I turned to the two organizations that I had the most confidence in that could help explain what is going on, and that is the American Civil Liberties Union of Utah and Planned Parenthood Association of Utah. And that's, I think that you can't be a free and independent thinker if your rights are being scrambled. So, with that, I'd like to introduce our two guests. I don't know what order you want to go in, but I'll just introduce both of them. You've got their biographies. Annabel Sheinberg from Planned Parenthood of Utah, and Vice President, and Danny Hall, Chairperson of the American Civil Liberties Union of Utah. Welcome our guests. Oh, Danny, one thing, I see when I depart from my notes, I would like you folks to give our guests a chance to complete their presentations before we ask questions. and hopefully we'll be able to divide the time that we have left. When they are through with their presentation, we'll open it up for questions, comments, or opinions. All I ask is, we got a lot of people here who I'm sure will have a lot of things to ask. No speeches. Thank you.
Alrighty, good morning. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Danny Hawks, or Danielle Hawks, as it says here. I'm a volunteer with the American Civil Liberties Union of Utah. I am the chair of the board. I have a 2-year term. I'm the chair of the board right now. In my real world, I am a divorce litigator. It's not quite as fun, but it is. I like it. I like fighting in court. I want to just say, first of all, before I start, I was here 2 years ago, and I got to know the organization. I got to know the Current Events organization and the Freethinkers organization, and have just been completely inspired by the work you guys are doing since then. I started stalking your Facebook pages since then, and I started watching what you're doing because, there's a lot of experience in the group, a lot of education and information, and so, yeah, I do follow along with everything you post. I don't post anything because I'm not probably officially part of the group, but I am incredibly inspired by the interest of continuing to reach out and learn and be involved. It's just incredibly inspiring. The ACLU of Utah, what we do is we focus on the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights. And so wherever the Constitution of the United States impacts people and the impact is government related, we get involved. So we don't handle animal rights or climate, although I personally think deal with those on outside issues. The ACLU isn't involved in those issues. The ACLU involves government interactions with people where it's violating the United States Constitution. Now that is limiting, but it actually ends up being a lot of issues. So we work on dozens of different issues, and they're the biggest issues of our time, and they have been the biggest issues of our time for the last 100 years. We've been involved in them at the highest levels of the Utah legislature, the Utah Supreme Court, but also the national legislature and the national Supreme Court. If you look at any of the big lawsuits involving civil rights, the ACLU is almost always involved, along with Planned Parenthood when it involves women's reproduction. The saying goes for the ACLU, if you agree with 25% of what we're doing, then you should probably come to our events and keep learning. If you agree with 30% of what we're doing, you might want to become a donor and a supporter. If you agree with 50% of what we do, you should probably be a volunteer. If you agree with 75% of what we do, you should join the board. And if you agree with 100% of what we do, you're not paying attention. We do very, very controversial work. I personally do not agree with everything we do, and we do not agree within the organization. So, for example, right now, National ACLU is taking a position in New York that New York's ACLU doesn't agree with, and they're openly fighting in the press about it, which we think is healthy. Okay, my plan for my discussion, I'm going to talk for about 15 or 20 minutes, and we're going to do questions all the way at the end of Annabel's discussion. But what I'm going to discuss are religious liberties, which is sort of the impetus for this conversation, freedom of speech and expression, and how that's interplaying with religious liberties right now, immigration issues, because that's all over the news right now, incarceration issues. There's a lot I just am essentially on these two issues. I'm just going to show you what we're working on, and then if people want to discuss those during the conversation period, we can. And then the comments will be at the end of both presentations. So to start out with religious liberty, and I just want to acknowledge the fact that the experience in the room far exceeds my experience, and so if I misstate something, or if you want to correct something or something like that, there's going to be plenty of time at the end of the period to discuss these issues. But religious liberty falls under the First Amendment of the Constitution. These issues are the number one protections in our country. The First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of people peaceably to assemble. This entire paragraph is one big contradiction. It's just impossible, right? And the goal was not to just write the Constitution and be done with it, but it's a living document that it's our job to see to it that we implement this paragraph as best we possibly can. But these rights conflict a lot, and I'm going to show you some places they're conflicting right now. The ACLU of Utah fights for those to practice any religion of their choice or no religion at all, which actually is the more difficult side in Utah. And fundamentally fighting for a separation of church and state, which is near impossible in Utah. But those who follow the ACLU of Utah's work, we have some really amazing... We have some really amazing lobbyists up at the Hill. They work non-stop when the legislature's in session. I just go up there and sometimes sit and watch them because it's insane what they do. But we follow approximately 100 bills per year, and this is a huge issue about trying to keep the church or certain churches out of the legislation so that the government can pass laws that aren't mixing the two. It's an ongoing battle, right? And I just want to invite you, if you ever are up at the Utah legislature, feel free to contact me or reach out to the ACLU and say, I want to follow Marina. Like, where is Marina today? And that's what I do. I can't contact Marina, she's our head lobbyist because she's too busy, but if I contact someone else who's in the office, they can track her down for me, and I'll just go and watch her in meetings and stuff like that. Whatever Marina's at is interesting. So I think it's a really good way to be involved in the Utah legislature is go follow someone you know who's following interesting laws, and whatever meeting they're at is going to be informational. Okay, so free speech and expression. This is a wide swath of rights, but included in this swath includes the right to protest. Now, how many has anyone participated in the huge protests that have happened in the last couple of years? Good. I've never seen anything like it in my time. I've loved being a part of it. I've been a part of all of the LGBT rights protests in Utah, which have been some of the biggest in the country. But the ones that happened with the Me Too movement and in the last year or two have been inspirational and amazing. So the right to protest is a fundamental right. The ACLU has been educating people on their rights to protest. What does that look like? What can we do? What can't we do? And then more recently with the gun violence, the ACLU has been educating youngsters on their rights to walk out of school. And so what they've been doing is leading education programs with youngsters giving the talks. So we train youngsters to give their own talks and teach their own groups about what they're allowed to do. And then you saw what happened. We didn't instigate this, but we knew it was coming, and so we educated them. And then youngsters did walk out in droves out of schools because schools are becoming unsafe for them. So we have the right to protest, right to petition the government. That's usually through litigation. The ACLU is one of the biggest litigation firms in Utah. We fight a lot of fights with a very small team of people. The right to assemble, again, that's protesting and going up to the legislature and these things. The ACLU has been involved in nearly every major free expression case since the 1920s. We take extremely controversial positions on this, even to this day. And I just want to touch on the two areas that this involves. So we fought, back in the day, we fought for Nazis' rights to hold protests and to hold parades. And this was an extremely controversial position, obviously. Most of our staff members do not agree with this sort of thing, but we agree in the principle of free, safe speech. This came up again in Charlottesville, where the white supremacists were denied outright, without proper procedure or anything like that, a right to protest. And the ACLU represented them and and the court agreed with the ACLU that they were not given proper procedure. The permit to protest was granted, and at that protest, that's where the man drove his car into the protesters and murdered a young liberal woman who was in the counter protesters. So the ACLU since then has been having conferences and meetings and really deep discussions about what it means to support freedom of speech, and should we do it the way we're doing it. We are not an organization that's scared to look at our behavior and look at our positions and ask the hard questions. So I was lucky enough to get to go to Denver and be a part of a huge group of ACLU leaders who really looked into these questions. And the man, he's probably in his 70s now, who represented the Nazis in the 30s, in the 40s, he spoke, and he is a Jewish man. And he spoke about what it meant to take a Supreme Court case to the United States Supreme Court representing Nazis and what that looked like on the ground for him. He talked about how important free speech is for him and why he took that case. And he talked about how him and his parents were no longer allowed to go to synagogue because of it. And that he was essentially shunned from his Jewish community. And, he's still open to the idea, maybe rightfully so. And within him, he's torn about it. And so the ACLU of Utah has been talking with black rights advocates and talking about how allowing freedom of speech for everything and everyone ends up being violent against certain groups. And that the ACLU has traditionally been run by wealthy white people, litigators, right? And what it means for black rights, for indigenous people, for immigrants, for us to be supporting Nazis. So it's a very interesting conversation. I apologize, we didn't reach a resolution on any of it. We didn't reach a decision on any of it. The ACLU national and then each state is free to bring the cases they want to bring. But they're really important questions for our time about what freedom of speech looks like in our time, where there's really diametrically opposed views. So that's the two camps of thought right there. They continue to live on within our organization anyway, and honestly, they continue to live on within my own heart about what's the right way to go. This issue right here, I apologize, the writing went down a little bit. The most recent Supreme Court case that dealt with freedom of religion and freedom of expression versus another right was this Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado. This was at the United States Supreme Court just this last session. The ACLU was on the side. This is actually a very tricky question for the ACLU, because on one side you have Masterpiece Cake Shop, who is the cake designer. He owns a very small cake shop, and a gay couple asked them to make a cake for their wedding celebration. The cake shop owner refused, saying it was against his religious beliefs, and he's an artist, and he's just simply not going to use his art to go against his fundamental religious beliefs. Before the decision came out, I very much argued on both sides, and we had very heated board meetings over this question, because I think it's a very interesting question about religious freedom to do or not do whatever you want. But the ACLU has traditionally, and I tend to agree with this other argument stronger, although it's not, it's a tough question. But when you open a business in a public way to the public, You must serve the public without discriminating. That's been the rule since, back when we had black people sitting at countertops and saying, your business is open to the public. We are allowed to sit here and eat, and you have to serve us. And the Supreme Court agreed with that decision. This decision came down on the other side. The ACLU lost in this case. The ACLU agreed with the city that he should not be allowed to discriminate, and if he's open to the public, he should create cakes for everybody. We lost this decision. In the news, it was blasted as now people can discriminate against LGBT people. Well, the decision was very narrowly tailored, and the reason that Colorado lost, and the Supreme Court said that Masterpiece Cake Shop was right, was very narrow. What happened was that the board in Colorado that looked to see if there was discrimination was overtly hostile to the religious concerns of the cake shop. So because the board didn't properly stay neutral and analyze the situation, that's why we lost. Justice Kennedy, who's been the swing vote on all of the LGBT cases, and he's always ruled in favor of LGBT people, despite being an otherwise somewhat conservative judge. On this case, he ruled against the LGBT couple, and he said, actually, you can't see it here. Oh, it's right here. Well, you can't see that. That's not helpful at all. But I'll read the important part to you. Justice Kennedy's opinion noted that he may have been inclined to rule in favor of the commission, in favor of Colorado's anti-discrimination laws, if they had remained religiously neutral in their evaluation. So this is a good example about how fervor over an issue can create a really bad case for us, and where the wrong side, in my opinion, loses because it wasn't handled properly at the city level. They compared the cake owners' desire to not make the cake to the Holocaust and to slavery and such things as this, and Justice Kennedy said that was just totally inappropriate. It was not a neutral evaluation. The government's job is to remain neutral in regards to religion, and they were not neutral. So it caused really bad precedent in terms of civil rights because they did that. That's all my opinion, by the way. That's not the ACLU's opinion. Although it's probably somewhat close, but. Okay, so immigration really quick. This is from 2 days ago. Has everyone seen this picture? I have a new baby. This picture makes me sick. I don't know how you all feel about it. This issue at the border that's happening right now is extremely complicated. The ACLU does not work on any easy cases. This issue is extremely complicated, but this picture and tear gassing and these kids who are clearly impoverished with no shoes or pants. This mother is wearing a child's shirt, which to me tells me she's completely impoverished and can't afford her own clothing. I can't hardly even look at it without crying. I'm a new mom, so I'm all emotional around things like this. But the fundamental constitutional protections of due process and equal protection apply to every person, and it's not limited to citizens. So the ACLU has effectively used the United States Constitution to protect immigrants here at various stages of documentation. These people on the border are trying to seek asylum. We have treaties in place that allows people to seek asylum at countries all around the world. There's procedures for it, and what's happening is the federal government has been etching away at those procedures, and now what they're saying, I just heard this yesterday, the latest next big move is going to be that people have to wait outside of the border while their asylum petition is pending. Well, these people aren't from Mexico. The border is Mexico. It's a totally different country. So, and right now it takes about 2 years to even get your first hearing on an asylum case, right? So these people could possibly, the question is, do they sit across the border in a town they don't even know? Does this town, I have no idea what's supposed to happen for 2 years until the very first hearing. These issues can take years and years to sort out, and it's getting worse because the federal government is not properly appointing judges to immigration cases. The ACLU is also currently litigating a case up in Heber where the federal government is starting to deputize, with states' cooperation, state agency people. So what happens is, what's happening is that this conglomerate of men and women with guns and protection and all these sorts of things go blasting in to poor people's homes, arresting them, and it's confusing as the lawyers to know, what are we being arrested for, who's arresting them, where are they being sent, where are we litigating this case? Is it criminal? Is it immigration? It's immigration. Okay, who arrested them? We have state agency actors, we have city agency actors, we have federal agents, we have all sorts of people wearing different badges and different things being deputized to go in and enforce immigration laws, and essentially throwing out any sort of protections right out the window. Right, so when the police go in and try and go into your house, they have to follow all of these rules so that we don't have policemen just barging into people's houses with guns, right? Because what happens is people end up dying, right? Well, that's not what's happening with immigration law right now. And we have a Heber case and possibly other cases in Utah that are pending where we have these conglomerates of cross-deputized individuals who are blasting into people's houses and arresting them without due process, without proper cause, and really putting people at risk and danger. This case in Heber had children in the living room when this whole group of cross-deputized people came in. They couldn't find the man they were looking for on immigration issues, not criminal issues, immigration issues. The family was staying silent. They didn't speak English to my knowledge. And then what happens in these cases is they just end up arresting anybody, right, to sort of threaten these people. These people are people of color. They're people who do not have means to have lawyers on the phone the next day, like possibly I would, or maybe others of you in the audience would. These people are downtrodden. They don't speak English. And so the ACLU is working on helping them. In divorce court, what's happening, this is my own personal experience in divorce court, what's happening is, so for example, I have, not my personal case, but a friend's case, woman has been abused by her husband. She wants to get her and the kids out of the situation. They went to their first hearing. Opposing counsel threatened to have ICE at the next hearing. And so my friend posted on our divorce lawyer's page, can this happen? And a bunch of people said, yes, we've had it happen too, and our client's taken in by ICE at the next hearing while she's trying to get her and her kids out of a domestic violence situation. I'm getting the time thing, so I'm going to have to be quick about this. But incarceration has a bunch of issues to talk about as well if we want to go there. Due process, people get held in incarcerated without access to attorneys and things like this. And again, this happens more frequently to people who are impoverished, people of color, and people who don't speak English. ACLU is working on abolishing the death penalty in Utah right now, and we're very close, and we've been very close several years in a row. So this is actually something that could happen this year or next year maybe. We're working on evidence problems, police shootings, which are rampant and also revolve around people of color and people who don't have means, racial policing, prisons and jail conditions, and we're fighting a current grandma fight that actually we're trying to get the jail's policies, and they're saying that they're private documents because they bought them from a guy who develops jail policies, and so they're his work product and they're private. We're saying, no, they're not. They're a government document. You're using them to govern a government agency. We want to see them. So we're currently fighting that fight right now. Incarcerating families and children without due process. You're hearing about that with immigration. And then the right to representation doesn't mean anything if we aren't properly funding the defenders' organizations. Whew. That's what I've got. Thanks.
Well, that was exciting. Thanks, Danny. That was a really wonderful, quick trip through a lot of important issues. I'm Annabel Sheinberg. I'm with the Planned Parenthood Association of Utah, and we're in a moment, it's kind of unprecedented in terms of we're seeing rights and things that we thought were true kind of quietly slipping away. Sometimes as a federal government partner, we're not even aware of the changes that are being made until we find out. And so it's really important that we stay on our toes, and that we make, and that that at Planned Parenthood Association of Utah, we have made a commitment to continue to figure out how to do the best we can by the people who need sexual and reproductive health care here in our state, in this dynamic and very challenging environment. I'm going to go through a few things today. I've been with the organization about 12 years, so I'm a working staff. Danny is an awesome volunteer leader. We love our board members at Planned Parenthood. They help us with guidance and so many things. And I also want to say to the volunteers here who make this happen, you play a critical role in civic engagement, and all of our organizations depend on people like you to stay vital and connected and relevant to the community. So these are the things I wanted to touch on in terms of rights and a little bit of what Planned Parenthood is doing. And of course, we look forward to a Q&A after. So in terms of the plan, it's to look at access to health care, which some of us think is a human right, right? And Planned Parenthood believes that sexual and reproductive health care is part of health care. Women's health care is part of health care. Those are really core to our organization, right? We also believe that sex education is a human right, and that's the part of the organization I work a lot in, so I will talk a little bit about the sex education attacks on it and also what's going on here. Abortion, people probably know there's lots of restrictions on abortion. This is an issue as a country we're very divided about, but it is legal and it is the law of the land. That said, we are a provider of abortion at Planned Parenthood of Utah. So when these restrictions and attacks on it happen, we really have to step to and have our lobbyists paying attention so that we can continue to provide this service for people in Utah. The Me Too movement, has been alluded to. I'm going to talk a little bit about it and how at Planned Parenthood we focus on consent. And then we'll do comments. I want to preface my talk with a very short video. Oh, Don's giving me a message. I want to preface my talk with a very short video that comes from our brand new president and CEO, Dr. Liana Wen. As you can see from my talking points, it's the second time in our 100-year history as a national organization that we've had a physician at the helm, and we think that's very relevant to what's going on in the world today. Locally, our president here and CEO is Carrie Galloway. Some of you may know her. She's been our fearless leader for a long time, navigating how to be Planned Parenthood in a conservative state. And then here in Utah, we at our healthcare centers see about over 40,000 people, sometimes as many as 46,000 people in a year. We have 8 healthcare centers. Many of them are located in Salt Lake County. We do over 100,000 birth control visits a year. So as committed as we are to safeguarding abortion rights, I think we do a lot to help people plan their families and decide when and whether to have children, which are core values of our organization. So we believe in actually a broader, I'm gonna just refer you to this document. In order to do our work, we need a larger movement to be part of. So the ACLU is part of our larger movement. This work is done in coalition. And so together with our coalition partners, we are advocating for a health, rights, and justice agenda. Okay, I'm going to let you meet Liana Wen because we think she's pretty amazing, and then I'll come back.
I'm an immigrant. When I was 8, my parents brought me here from China. We came to the US with $40 to our name. We depended on Medicaid and food stamps, and also on Planned Parenthood for our healthcare. I became an emergency physician because I never wanted to turn any patients away. In the ER, I saw what happens every day when people don't have access to the basic right to healthcare. I remember seeing a young woman lying on a stretcher, pulseless and unresponsive, because of a home abortion, because she was too scared to seek medical care. I did everything I could to resuscitate her, but she died. She died because of a failure in our system. And I wanted to fight for our most vulnerable individuals on a bigger scale, and that's why I became the health commissioner of Baltimore. I am the doctor for the city.
Since 2015, the department's been using a federal grant to teach birth control and other measures, but that grant is being ended 2 years early.
Last year, the Trump administration cut our teen pregnancy prevention program, which would deny health education for up to 20,000 of our students. This cut to us is shocking and unprecedented. So we sued the Trump administration, and we won. I fought the Trump administration when they tried to impose a gap rule on what doctors are allowed or not allowed to tell our patients, only for reproductive health and women's health. Imagine if this were the case for any other medical procedure. It would be ludicrous. Reproductive health care is healthcare. Women's healthcare is healthcare. And healthcare has to be understood as a fundamental human right. Having a physician as the head of Planned Parenthood, it is a sign that what we are doing is mainstream medical care. Why is it not? I see what's at stake. Every year, 2.4 million patients come to Planned Parenthood. They don't come to make a political statement. I see what happens when clinics close, and millions of women could be denied access to basic healthcare services. Those who will be hurt the most are those who already bear the brunt of health disparities. They are women of low income, of color. They're LGBTQ individuals. They're immigrant communities. They are working families. We have to do everything that we can to fight. Everything is at stake. There is no more important time than now, and no more important organization than Planned Parenthood.
She's pretty exciting, huh?
Yeah.
Yes.
So thanks for indulging me with the video. I just think all of us experience the world primarily through our lived experience. And Dr. Wen's story of being an immigrant, guess where she landed first? Utah. From China with no money, they ended up in Logan. Yes, so we're hoping we get to bring her here. But, you know, that is literally, right, that lived experience of going through, coming to a country with no money, relying on public support, being able, I think that she went to college at 16 and then was a Rhodes Scholar. I mean, and that's coming from China, probably learning English when she got here as, I forgot how old she said she was, 6. So, you know, that's going to give her a perspective on doing this work that is very valuable and reminds all of us to center the people who we are serving in the work we are doing. And right now with the attacks that are going on Muslim people, immigrant people, on people of color, we really have to make sure that we are joining with all of the movements to promote justice across the board. And I think Danny spoke to that, but it's just really a powerful moment to think on that. So a lot of this was touched on in the video. I want to say that in Utah, we're the Title X family planning partner, and this program was started in the 1970s, and it wasn't really considered a political football at that time. It was reproductive health care. It was birth control for people who couldn't afford it. It was started by President Nixon. That funding source now is a political football, and it is it's 19% of our revenue. So we are the sole grantee for Utah, and we are a federal partner. And as such, we sometimes have had to challenge, especially this administration. So we decided in the summer to join a lawsuit, well, our board decided, because the guidelines issued by the administration were contrary to the intent of the funding source. So they were no longer allowing providers to let a woman know who didn't want to be pregnant or who did, that she had an option of terminating the pregnancy. So they were going to change the way federal family planning partners could provide care. In fact, to them, to the administration, the only people who should be having sex at all are married people. And we know the lived experience of folks coming into our clinics, and that would really change our ability to deliver care. And to be respectful and non-judgmental, right, and compassionate to our clients. So these are the reasons why we, as Planned Parenthood of Utah, together with Planned Parenthood in Ohio and Wisconsin, decided to challenge the new guidance on the Title X family planning program, because it is contrary to the purpose of the funds, right? So these funds were appropriated, these funds were part of the family planning program, and the new guidance was not aligned with the goals. So that's one issue. We're continuing to fight the old guidelines as we wait to see what the new guidelines say. There is a threat that there may be a gag rule, right? That we can't say the word abortion. We don't know. Preliminary reaction to their guidelines that they floated, there were comments from the field that came in. There was a comment period. And I want to highlight that comment period. They got so many comments from folks that were so opposed to the direction they were heading that it has stalled the issuance of the third set of guidelines we're going to see on this program. So when you have an opportunity to comment, right? Because that becomes a data point in this process. And someone's going to read it, and they may not respond directly, but it seems to, in this case, have made a difference. At least it's slowing down the issuance of the new guidance. So we are still funded by the Title X program, and we are still able to provide care in the way we have been. We will see what the new guidelines say. Dawn mentioned Catholic hospitals. I want to talk about that a little bit. Hospital systems that basically limit what people who work for them can do. So say you're a doctor and your employer has a contract with you that says you may not have a side job in which you provide certain services, such as termination of pregnancy. Physicians and nurses, depending on the state, can provide abortion care, can provide contraceptive health care, right? Because some Catholic hospital systems take issue with contraception, right? And so doctors don't have a lot of rights. They're getting into employment agreements. They don't have a lot of wiggle room, and that is in fact affecting their ability to service other clinics and other providers who they might otherwise be able to support. So this is an issue. In a state like Washington State, our state it's not a huge issue because we have IHC here, right? And IHC doesn't do that. But in a state like Washington State, it impacts providers in terms of what they can do in their regular work. So the National Women's Law Center has hired someone just to help providers negotiate their contracts, right? They've taken this on as an issue. It's a tough one. State policies. So it took us a voter initiative, right? A ballot initiative to expand Medicaid. It was up to the people and people did it, but it took a long time. And that has affected people's ability to access basic health care, including contraception. And it will take till April until that actually starts to be implemented here in Utah, now that we've passed it. But yay for all those people who collected signatures, right? It really took a people's effort. I think I've covered these, all of these. Employer restriction, yeah. So that's access to healthcare. I just want to, center our patient experiences. We're seeing a lot of people who don't have insurance. Another access issue is this administration is now saying that employers who are faith-based employers or who have a religious perspective to their company can decide. I'm not sure exactly, what the delineate. I think it's if a company chooses to, based on religious reasons, they can decide that they don't want to offer the birth control benefit to their employees. Again, when and if that happens, that affects people's access to health care, right? So that will mean that we'll have to make decisions about providing care for people who lack insurance, which we always have. But if we lose our Title X, it's going to be more of a thought. That's why our commitment is to figure it out, okay? Sex education. So if you're opposed to people getting birth control, hopefully you support education, right? Sex education is so popular, even in a state like Utah, comprehensive sex education that provides information about everything from not, refusal skills and not engaging in a behavior to how to protect yourself if you decide to engage in a behavior with contraception. It talks about consent and communication, and it includes, different pathways to having a family, and it includes reproductive technology as a way to get pregnant, right? Trying to be inclusive and talk about what this is like for people in their life. Most people want that for kids. So during the Obama years, huge progress was made. The administration invested in comprehensive sex education, okay? Like to the tune of $75 million nationally and then $100 million. So I do have to correct, abstinence only, okay, so Betsy DeVos is the Secretary of Education, but in Health and Human Services, which actually is over the $100 million appropriated to comprehensive sex ed, they've put in sort of the chief abstinence only education champion, Valerie Huber, who's initially from Ohio. And that's tough for folks like us who believe in comprehensive sex ed. You may remember when I was here previously, our contracts were arbitrarily cut, and those were sex education contracts as well as an STI testing contract. These contracts that we are now a part of, the federal funds that were granted in 2015, for the last 2 years we've been on the edge of our seat. Are these grants going to get cut or not? There were actually 7 lawsuits filed around the country over the sex education grants last year. It turned into a very complicated thing, and in the end, despite the fact that the administration notified everybody that the funding was going away, they were told they can't do that and they have to continue the funding. So kind of similar to what happened on a state level in Utah, repeated itself in 2017 all across the country. So lawsuits were filed in Maryland, lawsuits were filed in Washington State, Washington DC, many cases, and essentially, once again, the federal government was told they cannot just arbitrarily cut 5-year contracts. Okay. I want to say on the positive side, there were 109 bills introduced to expand sex education last year. And given the times we live in, they wanted to expand the conversation around consent, around healthy relationships, around partner communication. There were bills that went the other way too, but in state legislatures around the country, we are seeing some positive progress. I want to quickly talk about abortion. This is a common way to discredit Planned Parenthood nationally, which is to say that we use federal funds for abortion, which is not allowed, right? That's not allowed. And we don't do that. We receive reimbursement for the health care we provide, right? And we use federal funds for birth control, okay? So we're very good at delineating, and we have done it for years. The Hyde Amendment severely restricts access to abortion for poor people, right? So I just put on here, is it a right if people can't access it? This is something we really all, I think, as a country have to think about. So what we do at Planned Parenthood is we have a justice fund. We're able to slide everybody's fees down by 30% no matter what. For populations like homeless folks or folks who are sex trafficked, we can slide more. Like They just have a conversation with our folks at our clinic. We do work hard to defeat bills about abortion at the legislature. Last year there was one proposed that basically said if you have a pregnancy with Down syndrome, you are not allowed to have an abortion. That bill did not pass. Marina, our lobbyist Heather, many folks worked to stop that bill. So that bill did not pass. There was another restriction that we were able to work on after the session that also didn't pass, that had to do with telemedicine and how we can use telemedicine to increase access to abortion. I'm only going to talk briefly about Me Too because I want to get to your questions. But I think it's important to acknowledge that, thankfully, women are finally starting to speak their truths about their experience in the workplace and what that means for their careers, their livelihood, and their family. We've seen huge women's marches, we've seen huge activism, and we've also seen some pushback. So Title X, which is all about prohibiting sex discrimination in universities and public K-12 education. We now have the Education Secretary meeting with parents of young men to try to make sure that they're protected. Yeah? And so that could affect women's ability to advocate for themselves if a sexual assault did take place. Where this lands for us, consent is like fries. So consent is freely given, it's reversible, it's informed, it's enthusiastic, and it's specific. We do a lot of work at Planned Parenthood in Utah with our peer health educators who are young people aged 10th grade to 12th grade. They're in a program where they give us over 100 hours a year, and we train them to teach their peers both one-on-one and in classrooms about the importance of conversations around consent, around relationships, and also around contraception and family planning. Okay, I'm going to stop so that we can do questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, you folks can sit down if you'd like, and then I'll carry this mic around after we get settled, wherever you'd like. I'll probably turn that one off, Annabel. Before I pass the mic around, I want to tell you, these two folks are really, really busy people. And I'm so appreciative that they've not only to set aside the time, but all of the efforts that they participated in just getting this thing organized and working through, our flaps about losing our date last month, etc. So thank you very much for that. Okay, I'm going to take the mic around. Raise your hand. Try to keep it as brief as possible. Thank you, and direct it to a specific person, if you would.
Thanks, Don. Good morning, Joe Mycroft, Cottonwood Heights, Utah. Thank you both for coming. There's a lot to unpackage. Let's go to the ACLU first, if you don't mind. And the freedom to protest. Years ago, I think it was George Bush came to town and they locked everybody up in Liberty Park and said, this is where you can protest your government. Is that legal? I mean, I know they did it, they got away with it, but is that something that our government really should be doing? Thank you.
Yeah, so that's, I think we saw similar things when Trump came into town and how, and I think there's a fine line between keeping protesters safe and being smart with protests versus putting protesters where they're not going to see the motorcade or the motorcade's not going to see us. Like, it's important that the motorcade see the protesters. I've done a lot of protesting, and if I'm going to leave my house on a cold, rainy night, the dang motorcade better run into us. But I have to tell you, and I don't know specifically about that specific protest, but I definitely think that the government has to has a high burden to meet when they restrict speech in that manner. And if they push the envelope too much, the ACLU will sue them for not, and we can get really quick injunctions. Like that's what happened in Charlottesville is they got essentially, I think it took them a couple days for the court to agree with them and enjoin that and allow those protests to go ahead. That being said, I was also a part of one of the Trump protests, and I've been a part of, as I said, the queer protests for years, and queers are really good at protesting. We keep it nice, we keep it friendly, we do it in impactful ways. This other protest for Trump was run by people who I'm not sure had done a lot of protesting, and they instigated violent conversation and violent sort of rhetoric before the protest began, before our march began, and then they marched us straight into Trump supporters, protesters. And for me, I was shocked after years of safely protesting that the leaders of our group and the leaders of the other group hadn't coordinated better, and we walked side by side with violent people, violence going both ways for several blocks. And I have to tell you, it has to be done well. You have to have organizers who know what they're doing, because that was really scary for me. I ended up in a tree watching because I didn't want to be on the ground. And I like climbing.
Billy, ACLU, maybe this is best asked, how do you deal with people who are strict constructionists when it comes to the Constitution and don't really believe in the interpretations that the Supreme Court has made over the years?
Yeah, the question is about strict constitutionalists who believe that the document is not a living document, that it was written and that it shouldn't change with the times. This is a Scalia type argument, and the newest Supreme Court justices are being appointed in the eye towards this construction. My personal opinion about it is that we'd still have slavery, we still would have women who don't vote, all these sorts of things. I can't imagine how that's possible, and I believe in a better country for my new daughter, so I just don't agree with it personally. I think there are philosophical arguments about both directions, but personally I think it's wrong.
I got a question for ACLU, Danielle. When does, is that right?
Yes, you got it.
Oh, yeah, when does free speech become hate speech in a legal way?
Yeah, that's a good question.
The question is about when does free speech become hate speech? And I don't know, I'm not a legal scholar on these issues. I sort of wish I had one of our litigators sitting here because they would have the exact answer for you. But the balance is tough, right? Like, is it hate speech to say I hate you? Or is it hate speech when it starts inciting violence? Right? I don't know the answer to that question. Around the ACLU and those conversations we had in Denver, at a minimum, the ACLU needs to start taking a deeper look into whether an organization has been involved in violence. And so we're taking that very seriously. Utah's chapter as a chapter is taking that very seriously, that if someone asks us to litigate one of these issues, if that organization has been involved in violence towards people of color or other repressed groups, then we're not going to take the case on their behalf.
So I'm not sure which one of you ladies would like to answer this question. Abortion rights not receive, I'm trying to phrase this right, if I can't obtain an abortion, I don't have a right to an abortion. If I cannot obtain a weapon, I don't have a Second Amendment right. Are both of those compatible discussions? Good luck.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I mean, I would think, one has to do with my own body, right? And my ability to make decisions, my privacy. I think there's, it's like a different lens for me. So one is about my very private and personal healthcare decision, and one is about me buying something, essentially. And so I think that they kind of are in a different context, right? And so one is about literally my life, maybe my health, maybe my livelihood, like literally I may not be compatible with a pregnancy, yeah? And so in that situation, I think there's a difference. And you know, again, ability to access the right to abortion can depend on my ability to get on an airplane and go somewhere where I can get one. There's a lot of rural communities, there's a lot of places where people maybe don't, like in Texas, there's large swaths of Texas where people just, you would have to drive for a day, or if you can't get on a plane, and you might not be able to do either. I bet you could go 10 minutes and get a gun in most places. So I think that's also a layer of the difference, right? There's different profit motives, there's different industries involved. I mean, yeah, one is healthcare and one is kind of a recreation, really, yeah.
I agree with all of that. I think it's an incredibly difficult question. We're not going to let you ask any more questions. So Don, just monitor that a little better. I think that this question raises a really interesting intellectual exercise, and that is when we're law students pontificating up at our law school and, having our coffees and arguing over an issue like this, it's a very important to understand that it's a position of privilege to be arguing about these issues, and when we bring it down to what's actually happening in our country, it's a whole nother conversation, right? And when I was out protesting for queer rights, as a bisexual woman who intended to marry a woman and have children with a woman, it was incredibly infuriating to me that my male cousins, who are all conservative, and I love them to the moon and back, but it made me so angry that they were so privileged that their biggest concern in life was going hunting, right? Like, I was literally watching cases of people like me getting their kids taken away in our state. Right? And I'm on the ground fighting so that one day I can have a child. And I waited till I was almost 40 to have a child until the rights were so that my kid couldn't be taken away from me. Right? So I'm 38. I just had my first child, and I waited until I could do it safely and legally. So that when you bring those two issues to the ground, it can be somewhat different than what it sounds like in a coffee shop.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
By the way, while I walk the mic over, I just finished reading Cecile Richards' autobiography, and I strongly recommend it to anybody who wants to read about a very impressive person. Other than the fact that I think the myopia in this country would stand in her way, I'd love to see her run for president. Annabel, what's the name of the book? Do you remember?
Trouble. Make trouble. Make trouble? Is that good trouble?
Something like that.
It's
Anyway,
either good trouble or make trouble. I have it too.
the book is at the county library. Oh, Cecile Richards. Look it up by author.
This is for both our guests. A few days ago, I received an interesting phone call that the lady asked me if I was pro-life or pro-choice. I says, absolutely. I am. And she said, no, which one? I said, both. I'm pro-life and I'm pro-choice. And she said, no, you can't be both. I said, well, who made that rule? Anyway, it strikes me as though it's a violation of the separation of church and state.
Right.
To argue about this. And I guess I'd like to just hear your comments about that.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your comments, because I would say I am too. And because the way I say it is, I care about, I'm pro people making a decision for themselves about what to do for their family and with their own body. And I hope they get to make that decision, right? And, there was recently a law in Mississippi. The Supreme Court judge struck down this law that the legislature passed that said 15-week abortion ban. And then this just happened, and the judge just issued a statement saying, this is not the law of the land. We can't do this. And he said, the irony is not lost on me as a male that I'm making decisions about women's bodies. And he said that where is the concern for people who are born? He said this doesn't do anything, if the concern is about life, right? We have a lot of, think about the picture of the people, some of the big pictures and issues we've dealt with. There's so many people who need support from our society. So I'm very pro-life, and I think it's so important that we support folks who need the support. And also, just, over 50%, it's not quite 60, of people who have abortions are parents. We demonize these people as if they have no, values. And the truth is, these are parents often making decisions to have a better life for the children they have, right? And so just to remember, yes, it's okay to be pro-choice and pro-life, yeah. And the words are very limiting.
As I turn this over to Bill, 1 minute, Ricky. I have yet in the state of Utah actually met a pro-life person. I've met a lot, and I'm talking about legislators I've talked to. They try to tell me they're pro-life, and I start talking about how many Utahns have died because of inaccessibility to medical care. So don't tell me you're pro-life, tell me you're anti-abortion, but don't try to make an idiot out of both of us.
So I just want to answer that as well. So I was a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. for reproductive health. And I became extremely frustrated in my own organization and other organizational meetings we'd have, coalition meetings, with the limited scope of conversation. It's like, and maybe you don't feel this way, but I'm out of it now, so I get to say what I want. But it's like if you're on one, you have to be on one side or the other on these extremely difficult conversations. Like, it's impossible to be on one side or the other, and we need to knock it off. It's an awful habit we've gotten into. And we need to look at the stories of people. If you look at an individual woman and the man involved in any case, it's good. Even just their simple case has a story behind it that's complicated. Maybe those two individuals are pro-life too, but are they going in to get an abortion? Yes, they are. What's that about, right? And we need to just stop the limiting of these stories by saying, well, that couple doesn't exist because that doesn't work, right? No, yeah, I love the question. Yeah. I love the answer.
I like the answer.
Bill,
I mean,
and then Ricky and Sally go.
Let me get back in my head after that. It is now a punishable, not legally obviously, but a punishable offense within the Salt Lake County Democratic Party to leer and to ask someone out for coffee. And I don't expect, I've gotten the drift that I'm not getting legal interpretations out of you guys. So discussion on that, especially since it's probably a very volatile topic at the moment.
What do you mean? Because I don't know about that.
I don't
You don't understand
what are you
the
talking
Democratic
about?
Party. That's okay. It's okay.
Well, no, I mean, you don't need to belittle my intelligence. I'm actually super smart. But I don't understand where that's coming from. Like, that you can ask someone out for a coffee. I've never heard of that. So if you could just give us some background around that, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I think that should go for it.
There are some fairly strident people within the Democratic Party at the county level, and they dealt with a couple of cases that involved what they might have improperly labeled sexual harassment. And they came up with some guidelines and allowed for punishment in the form of censure or telling them someone that they weren't part of the party for some things that a lot of people considered to be beyond the scope possibly of sexual harassment. Nobody, I don't think, argued against the idea of somebody being, harassing somebody by groping them or things like that. But they got very, they got out there with their rules, and I'm guessing it's probably something that the ACLU might have come down on the other side of if there were some sort of something. But the Me Too folks probably would be on the other side.
You get a frequent different coffee shop.
Wait a minute.
Okay, Ricky?
This is starting.
Wait, are we gonna answer that or?
Please,
Yeah.
please.
I think that what we talk about when we talk to young people is explain the purpose of the coffee, kind of have communication. If you want to talk to somebody about an issue, then that's why you're going to coffee. They should both know why they're going to coffee up front. So what is the purpose of the coffee? Is this, I want to get to know you better, or is this, I want to continue that conversation? And then is there a conversation that precedes going anywhere that is limited to just that? Like going to coffee is just going to coffee. It's certainly not consenting to anything in addition to that, right? So that would be thinking about fries, right? It's freely given, it's informed. And then we want to think about consenting to one thing certainly doesn't mean I consented to anything else, or even to going to coffee again. And again, I think these are the conversations we have to teach people to have for themselves so that we don't get in a situation where there's kind of an arbitrary rule applied to a whole bunch of people when maybe there were some individuals who didn't respect another individual or couldn't have the conversation prior. I'm not really sure the specifics of it, but I guess I would argue, I think that we're in a situation where we have a lot of people that have a hard time saying what they want. We haven't taught women that they are independent agents because of sexism and because of socialization. And so we really need, as women and as people who care about women, to empower women to say, no, going to coffee doesn't feel like a good idea, don't want to do it. Or, sure, I'll go, but I'm going to bring a friend with me, or whatever it is. Or can we have the conversation here? But I think that there is some work to do for really to empower all people to communicate better about what they want and what their intentions are.
And I would want to see the policy because it sounds wrong to me.
It's on the internet.
Yeah, so I would want to read the policy because it seems to me that just eliminating networking would hurt women.
And hurt the party.
And hurt the party.
Yeah.
Because we have to network with people in order to do business. And I am friends with several people in the party, and I'll follow up with questions with them just to educate myself on what that policy is.
Okay, Ricky, and then Charles, do you have your hand up?
She has her in the front.
Bob, or Sally, Joe, and then Bob, and then Charles, I guess.
I had like 5 reactions all of a sudden, but it comes down to semantics. Going back to the original pro-life, pro-choice, I don't think that pro-life, first of all, the way it's being used is accurate. They really mean pro-birth. If you were pro-life, you would be for all of the things needed by people who are in various levels of desperate situations. And life goes on right through from conception, if you believe in that, or birth, certainly, I think is the legal definition, to death. And if you're pro-life, you support people in need all through that spectrum, period. Me too, I heard that, but there wasn't any explanation of how that's being used. And I'm probably not up to speed on what the latest definition of that is. But what bothers me is I'm hearing people being anti-Me Too. How do you do that? What don't I understand about Me Too? And I'm very disturbed by the polarization that implies. Because what it means is people are saying, I'm in this camp, you're in that camp, and we're not talking. And that bothers me.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, I really like your comment about being pro-life, and what that means. And I want to say that the reproductive justice movement is a movement started by people of color that has really helped all of us think about this issue of abortion in a larger context. So if you're bringing a person into the world where there's a lack of safety, right, where that person will not be free from violence, you might not want to bring that person into the world, right? That everybody has the right to decide if they want to parent, if they don't want to parent in each situation, and also to how to raise their child, to raise their child in a world free from violence, right? So it acknowledges there's more than just one simple thing that people are focused on, and that the world that we want is the world we have to work for broader issues that allow people to have the lives they want to have. And so it keeps us, I think, looking to that higher level of goals, which is super important. In terms of the Me Too movement, I think, the dialogue right now on all of these issues is really tough. And what we have to decide, some of this is we have a leader with a large megaphone who doesn't have the most respectful behavior or attitudes toward women. And it has emboldened some people to act in a way that is not respectful, right, of lots of people, including women. And so what we need to decide is, how are we going to get the majority of Americans to get the megaphone? When is that going to happen? When are we going, these progressive people who are getting elected, we're getting more women in office, we're seeing the shift. And I think when that happens, when we have other people with a megaphone, it will feel less polarized. When we can agree that we can have a different opinion and I can live with her different opinion, I don't have to convince her, or I can respect her different opinion, then we're going to be able to coexist in a different way than we are right now. And I agree with you. It feels extremely intense in terms of finding middle ground and the challenges of live and let live, right? Which is kind of how many societies deal with things that we don't agree on.
I think the Me Too movement is a really excellent example of people sharing their stories. A lot of stories are not allowed to be shared in our society. You're not allowed to say if you've had an abortion. If I told you right now my story, or we started sharing stories around that would be a real movement, right? If we all of a sudden heard about the 1/3 of women who have abortions, I think that a lot of people's eyes would be opened about what does that mean? What does that underbelly, silent story entail? I think the Me Too movement is a very successful example of people becoming honest with their story of sexual assault. And for me and for a lot of people, I think it was an eye-opener about how many people are victims of sexual assault. A lot of women, men, and it's been eye-opening to say the least. And now you're not going to be able to pass legislation in the future without considering these people's stories now, because the stories have been told now and they have to be dealt with.
All right, Sally Jo.
This is for both Danielle and Anna. Did you bring along envelopes for financial donations?
I did.
I didn't.
Yeah, there are some envelopes and materials from both organizations. The Planned Parenthood envelopes are on the table. Please help yourself.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for asking that
Yeah,
question.
that's a good question.
Okay, I'm wondering about Steve. First of all, Bob, and who do we have?
Charles, been waiting.
We have Charles, then Bob,
I think
Steve.
most of us, the only way we can affect them, make our world better or worse, is through organizations. I think it's important, the integrity of the organization. The integrity of the organization. I'm a member of the ACLU and I'm also a member of the NRA. And to get back to this question, it was interesting to me that I don't necessarily agree with the ACLU perspective on the Second Amendment. But recently in a court case, and I don't know all the details, the ACLU and the NRA were co-defendants, I guess, based on First Amendment issues. That even though the organizations don't agree with the Second Amendment, they support each other in terms of everybody should still be heard, or you have the ability to be heard. So and you actually addressed it a couple times now in your last answers about the organizations, convened organizations. If the organizations just have the integrity to do what they say they're doing, then that's good, because then we can all talk.
Yeah, I think that it's important for an organization to have integrity, and for me, the ACLU is a really fun organization to be a part of because the Constitution is so complicated. And the question is about the right to bear arms versus everything else that ACLU does. The ACLU's position on that, at least the ACLU of Utah, and this is my understanding that it's our position nationwide, but the ACLU of Utah, and my understanding of that is that we're not for or against gun ownership, and that it is something that gets a lot of money, a lot more money than we get, and we handle far more issues than the NRA handles. And so my understanding is we kind of let the NRA handle gun rights because we can't afford to. Now, I am a volunteer for the ACLU, so I bet the executive director might be more eloquent about how that works. But I can tell you that it's something we wrestle with actively. And the case I talked to you about in New York, where the local affiliate disagreed with the national, I think it's exactly the case you're talking about, where national supported NRA's position, and the local affiliate said, we are handling so much violence locally that we disagree with national's position on this, and they're openly and friendly, although disagreeing with one another, airing their grievances publicly in newspapers and things like this. So even within our organization, it's a difficult conversation.
Well, I don't think it is difficult, because you're both defending on First Amendment issue. That's where you agree.
On the First Amendment, yes. And I mean, I just wanted to answer to your point on integrity. We work super hard to protect our patients' information, our donors' information, people's privacy. There is a lot of messiness to being a healthcare provider, and there are a lot of relationships we need to manage with people and acknowledge the range of experience that they have. We work really hard to be as dignified about the care we provide as we can, because we know people are coming in with all kinds of situations on their mind and in their lives that day. So I would say that's one of the things where integrity is super central in our organization.
As I pass this mic over to Bob, we're hitting a point now where people are starting to peel off. So I want to make sure you take a look at the information provided by both of the organizations. They're at the table up there. And we'll continue with questions until we have to move into the informal mode.
I have mostly a comment back to the right to protest. Personally, I believe in free speech. I like to hear both sides of an issue, whether I agree with them or not. However, there was an article in the paper a few days ago where they reviewed what the Supreme Court said about right of free speech, where they said the incitement of violence is not protected speech. And I don't know if you saw the program last week about Hatred in America, which covered the Sheinberg situation. You mentioned that the ACLU helped get approval for the white supremacists to protest.
Yes.
Did you see the program about that?
I did not.
It showed how the white supremacists are neo-Nazis in hidden clothing. They don't dress to recognize themselves anymore, but they show how they have a terrorist organization that they meet to cause terror in this country, and how they go around. They had video where they went around the country beating up people that protest. Now, it would seem to me we have the right to protection, as you said you were concerned in the march you were in. It would seem to me the ACLU or anybody that applies to protest, they need to be researched to see if they're a violent organization. That right they don't have to do.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, and I think that the ACLU is growing past it used to be sort of a black and white issue for the. That's interesting that I said that. But it used to be an easier issue, I think, for the ACLU. But now that we have more members who are in the minority, we're not just representing the minority anymore. We have members and we have leadership who are in the minority, who are African American, and who are the subjects of this violence. And the ACLU is having to reckon with that and change the way we handle this issue. And we don't have answers around it yet. I know locally, we have had conversations, hours and hours and hours of conversation with the top scholars who advocate exactly your point, telling us that we need to change, and then scholars who say we shouldn't change, you protect free speech for everybody no matter what. My position and the local position is that we need policies that when we get a case in the door that needs immediate attention, we are able to vet. And like you said, it needs to be researched before we take a position on it. We have to vet that group and make sure they're a safe group. It's not okay for them to put other people in danger. And so I think we're right on track with what you said, hopefully.
I mean, I want to say, as someone who works for an organization that provides abortion, we are targeted often by people who hate what we do. And we have to think very hard about the safety of everyone who works for us, everyone who comes in for health care, and we have to take that extremely seriously. And so, yes, we value the due diligence, the conversation about what is appropriate in this regard, because it's complicated. It truly is. And to further complicate it, sometimes the folks out protesting us end up coming in for an abortion. Danny alluded to that, but it really does happen. And it's just a layer of complexity that shows how hard this stuff really is at the human level.
I think the extreme point is where we have a president who encouraged people to hit the protesters in the face that he'll cover their attorney fees. Seems to me we need to put some restrictions on our leaders.
We'll get right on that. I would love to do that.
Hi, Steve Van Maren. First, I apologize for impugning your intelligence. I didn't mean to do that. If you're not familiar with the policy, you couldn't have answered the question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the ACLU helped write any of the petitions, referendum petitions last year? Propositions? Yeah, propositions.
Yeah, I don't think we helped write any of it. I'm trying to think of what our involvement has been. Our big involvement during this election has been in voting access. So on the reservations and things like that, we've brought some litigation around access to people to vote. And in San Juan, we have a new face of the council there that looks like the people who live there. But I don't think we've been heavily involved in the initiatives, but I'm not 100% certain.
Thank you.
Oh, you have someone behind you.
Oh, sorry. My concern at the moment, or one of my main ones, is the issue with transgender people.
Yes.
I'm seeing all kinds of scary things coming up, and my transgender friends are getting very nervous. What do you think is going to happen with that?
So the question is about transgender people. This is a group of people whose stories have not been told. They get told in my office all the time because 100% of my pro bono work is with the queer community, and right now that is representing trans people who, and I am fiercely strongly opinioned on this issue. I could give you a whole presentation on this issue. What I know from the stories I hear in my closed confidential office is there's a significant percentage of people in our community who identify as trans, who are not out as trans and live this life, and we don't know it. And it's something that happened in the people I've talked with. They knew since they were 5. They knew since they were little kids, and they knew before they knew anything about this condition. They knew something was wrong with them. They often experience self-harm, issues of substance abuse, and when they are proceeded safely and medically through the option of transitioning, we see those issues improve. We see substance abuse issues improve. We see self-harm issues improve. Like the abortion question, I would love it if people were able to tell their stories so we could all learn about it. But right now it's just an underground story that people are hiding and they don't feel safe to come out. And they shouldn't feel safe to come out because they are targeted. They are targets of violence every day in our country. And they are murdered at rates much higher than anybody else. So they are not safe. But it's a huge issue, I think. Thank you for bringing it up.
Right. I mean, the concern is that the administration opposes letting anyone change their, have a gender that's different than their basic biology, right, from the birth that they were born with. So it's very disturbing to people because progress was made and now it's under, not just under attack, but they may be completely erased, right? Yeah.
Can I say something? These issues are used to get people to the polls. Right? These are people we can see, so it's easy to say they're disgusting and immoral. That's what they used to say about me, right? Until 10 years ago, that I was disgusting and immoral and just disgusting, an awful person. You should go vote against me, right?
Yeah.
And now that I'm out and about it, me and about 1 million other of my buddies, and they can see that I'm not disgusting and immoral, and I'm really rigid in my values, actually, probably too much. Okay, now we have to shift it to someone else we can't see, and who is that? Women who get abortions, they can't tell their story. Let's shift the blame to them, and let's shift it to trans people because they're too scared to tell their stories, and so these are awful, disgusting people. Go vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Pat Escalante, and I want to ask you a question about our schools, our organizations, on protecting not only women, but young men who get raped. Something is put in their drink. You don't feel safe, you can't move, and you don't do anything about it. It's all about shame. I think the people that we depend on are people like you to change them. Thank you for your time.
And how do we help?
Okay.
This is the time to say, what are you going to do to help us?
Well, I can think of one thing. So the Utah State Office of Education, and I can send this to Dawn, has just put forward new standards for sex education, and we're in a 3-month comment period. And you all can comment. You can take a look at the standards, which aren't that long, and you can comment on what you think about them. If they reflect your values, if you think they're good for kids. I will say, despite the fact that we are one state that removed the anti-gay aspect of our sex ed, so we removed, you can't promote homosexuality, there's nothing that says gay people in any of the standards. So I think for me personally, my comments will reflect that, hey, now you can be a little more openly inclusive, and I think the standards should reflect who's in the classroom. There can be more conversation about consent. There's pornography. There's supposed to be education about pornography in schools. You could comment on what you think that should be or shouldn't be. I think media literacy skills are critical for young people. They get a lot of information online. And so just talking about giving them the skills to interpret what they're seeing is important, right? And so I'll send down the link. I would love it if people wanted to comment on that.
And commenting on regulation, just so you know, is not just a warm, fuzzy thing to do. It can be used in litigation later. If an arbitrary and capricious decision is made, we can use the comments that were given and evidence and links to evidence and things like this, the community's opinion, we can use that in litigation later to show that the government made an arbitrary and capricious decision.
Okay, I'm going to give this to Jim here, and then I think we'll let you say whatever you guys would like to say to close the official part. Jim?
Well, I lived in Europe for a number of years, and over there, sex education is right out in the open, okay? They don't have the problems that we do here. The problems that we've allowed here is that we've allowed our churches to set policy, okay? And in my opinion, we've allowed our churches to set policy, and they don't want competition. I mean, they are looking after themselves, number one, and that's it. And my kids, my grandchildren, we have these discussions, you know. Some of them are rather vulgar, but they know what they're up against.
Yeah.
They know what they're doing.
2 years ago, I got a bunch of these from the Gay Pride Center and giving them out to seniors. I think the worst thing that I've seen in this country is the preoccupation and myopic perspective that too many people in this country have about other people's sex lives, gender. I mean, I indeed intend to have somebody here from the trans vote. Just like I had the Mama Dragons here about 2 years ago this month. Why would anybody look down on folks that are going through that kind of turmoil? It's beyond me how you can be so cruel. And maybe, Jim, you're right. This socialization of these cultural institutions called churches does a lot of harm. All right, last one, Ricky.
I just want to comment on I don't think it's just churches that try to standardize their own mores, but given our history, and I just happened to be reading, I think it's called the Hamilton Affair, and was shocked by something, because I couldn't sleep last night, a couple being put to death for adultery in this country in its earlier years. Don't ask me which ones. What bothers me more, given this conversation and our presenters, is I do not understand. My background is European. I'm an immigrant, so I have different thinking. I cannot understand how a government can presume to tell people what to do in the bedroom, when to do it, or legislate laws that regard any of that.
Trouble.
Well, I know what the history is, and I know where it comes from, and our unfortunate. I don't even like to call him the head of state. He's not a leader. I don't know what to call him. That's enough politics for now. It's more a matter of government has no business in government. Period. Period.
Can I say one thing before we close?
Yeah.
Before everyone goes running out the door. I just really appreciate that you guys gather. I hope you know how extraordinary this gathering is, that you guys do it on a regular basis. It does not happen a lot in our state, and you guys are really intellectually sophisticated and know what you're talking about, and I really think it's fantastic that you do this. I think the legislature needs to hear from all of you, because your guys' voice carries a lot further than a young person's voice, because you have the experience and knowledge and you know what you're talking about, and I think that the more you guys can spend time up at the legislature is going to help us all out a lot.
Oh, you're asking an awful lot. Okay, well, listen. Can we give these folks a hand for giving us time? Anybody want to continue on with the discussion with whoever's here? Please, when there are cookies in the back that Chuck brought in.
But the pastries are going. The pastries are going.
first or second grade. And I ever asked a question. You know, I don't remember asking questions about sex because they were treated
The only thing I
the same
disagree
way
with
as
your
the
colleague
question about
is
why is this guy using
consider
a
us to
breast
be-
cream or whatever. It was just another question. There was no real baggage with it. So I can remember it was in elementary school, and I don't know how much English I had learned yet by then. But I know that there was a protest.
That's pretty good, huh?